Hi, and welcome to the final session of the Better Citizens, Better World event. Our session today is entitled Practical Advocacy, How to Love Your Neighbor in the Civic Square. So with us, we have Kyle Christofalo, who is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Government Relations at Churches for Middle East Peace. Kyle holds a BA in Peace and Conflict Studies from Messiah College and a Master's of Divinity degree from Emory University's Candler School of Theology. He was first introduced to Middle East advocacy work during a semester abroad in Cairo, Egypt. And after graduating from college, Kyle spent 10 months serving with the Mennonite Central Committee in Bethlehem, Palestine, where he was seconded to work with Bethlehem Bible College. Most recently, Kyle served as the program assistant for Middle East policy at the Friends Committee on Legislation, where he helped coordinate lobbying work on Middle East policy and trained grassroots advocates on how to lobby their congressional representatives. And also with Kyle, we have Hassan Al-Tayyib. And Hassan is an author, songwriter, and the Friends Committee's legislative director for Middle East policy and advocacy organizer. Hassan leads the Friend Committee's work to end U.S. military involvement in the Saudi-led war on Yemen, advocate for Palestinian human rights, and advance diplomacy with Iran. Hassan was honored by Arab America Foundation as an awardee of its 2022 40 Under 40 initiative for his policy work on Capitol Hill. And prior to joining the Friends Committee, Hassan served as co-director of the national advocacy group Just Foreign Policy, where he worked to reassert congressional war authority and promote human rights in the Middle East and Latin America. His passion for foreign affairs is rooted in his desire to make life safer for people in the Middle East, including his extended family in Jordan, Palestine, and Yemen. He is convinced that advancing a more diplomacy-based foreign policy in the Middle East is critical, not only for the family he loves, but for peace and stability worldwide. He is frequently invited to guest lecture at colleges and universities around the United States on foreign affairs, and his writings and commentaries have been featured in numerous national and international news outlets, including CNN, BBC, World News, Politico, The Intercept, and more. So we are so thankful and grateful to have two such qualified men joining us today. So join me in welcoming Kyle first, and then Hassan.
Thank you, Anna. Really grateful to be with you all today. I will just say at the offset, please feel free if you have questions or ideas that come up during this session. You should be able to join the chat and use comments. We really welcome any questions, especially as this is focused on advocacy and how you can use your voice in the service of peace and justice. And so we have some ideas and some tips and would welcome any questions that you have. Hannah did the introduction of me, but I just wanted to spend, I know many of you are familiar with Churches for Middle East Peace, but in case there are those who are viewing this that are not, just a very brief overview of Churches for Middle East Peace and our advocacy priorities, and then we'll delve deeper into what it means to advocate and the tools that you can use from your home to, again, hopefully contribute toward policies that will result in just and lasting peace in the Middle East. So Churches for Middle East Peace, we're a coalition of 35 different national Christian denominations and organizations that spread out across the spectrum of U.S. Christianity, mainline Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, historic peace churches like FCNL and other Quaker institutions, as well as some evangelical groups. And our goal is to really help to educate U.S. Christians on what's happening in the Middle East, to elevate the voices of peace builders on the ground, and then to equip after you have learned, after you have heard from voices of peacemakers in Israel, Palestine, and the region, to then advocate on behalf of policies that will help bring about peace and justice in the region. So we focus on three primary advocacy priorities: holistic peace building, humanitarian and economic assistance, and human rights issues. And so later in this discussion, you'll hear about how some of those are directly relevant to policies that are being considered at this moment. So just before we start with the nuts and bolts of advocacy, we really, this is a very pivotal moment. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen the news just over the past few days of the Israeli government military's killing of Sinwar, who was the leader of Hamas. This follows the killing earlier this summer of Ismail Haniyeh, who was the political leader of Hamas. Sinwar was the leader of the Hamas government in Gaza. Haniyeh was the political leader of Hamas who was killed in July. And then, of course, a few weeks ago, Israel killed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. So the top leaders of both Hamas and Hezbollah have been killed. You might recall that Israel has been saying since the start that one of the primary goals of their military campaign in Gaza is to make it so that Hamas doesn't have political leadership, and so to kill the top leaders. And so now you're hearing more folks, especially over these last few days, say now is the time to end this war. Israel, you've accomplished what you have set out to. And so we've heard some of those voices rise a bit these past few days. We have over 1 million people displaced in Lebanon. There's the possibility of further escalations between Israel and Iran. The ceasefire negotiations seem like they are stuck. We don't hear as much about returning of the hostages who are held in Gaza. So this really is a moment where we have the opportunity to act. We have the elections coming up and then the lame duck session in Congress. It's really a moment where your advocacy efforts will be critical in helping to advance movements to end the war and address the urgent humanitarian needs. I think, just again, the events of the past few days with Sinwar's killing open up a possibility where a coordinated and targeted advocacy can really play a particularly important role. And so we're grateful that you're here with us to learn more about what can be done and what is already before Congress that needs more support and where your voice can really be critical. So we'll spend the next hour giving just a very brief overview sort of on the what, why, and how of advocacy, followed by a briefing that Hassan will give. Really grateful. Hassan is really a top lobbyist on Capitol Hill, advocating for peace and justice in the Middle East, and he's been instrumental in moving a lot of things behind the scenes, and so it's important to give him credit. So really grateful that he's here with us. And we hope that this will encourage you to take the next step of setting up meetings with your congressional offices, and we're here to support along the way. So I'm going to spend the first 10 to 15 minutes kind of doing a very broad 101, what is advocacy? And again, if you would like to use the comment section, if there are questions or things that are percolating, please feel free to do that. I will also make sure that you have my email, and I'm sure Hassan will also be able to share his email so that if there are questions that come up afterwards, or if you're watching this not live, you can reach out to us. So what is advocacy? Well, of course, a very simple dictionary definition of advocacy is the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. So we're going to focus primarily on political advocacy, specifically advocacy with your congressional offices, but this is only one form of advocacy. And so I think it's important to have this overview because you might find, for Hassan and I, a lot of our work is on the congressional advocacy side of things. but we all have different skills, different interests, different areas of contribution. And so for those of you who might not yet be at the stage where you think congressional advocacy is your area, there are other types of advocacy. And so always encouraging you to find those places where you can connect. So what are some of the other forms of advocacy? Economic advocacy, right? How and where we choose to spend our money is a form of advocacy. You might be very focused on supporting local businesses in your communities as a way to show your support for local small businesses that are connected and engaging and helping your community. So if you choose to spend your money that way, that's a form of advocacy. Social media, yes, it is possible to use social media for effective advocacy. I know, Hassan and I can both tell stories of ways that Twitter, now called X, has been used by constituents to directly engage with their congressional offices. Congress members really do look closely at those accounts, and if they're mentioned or referenced, that's something that they look at. So social media can be used for advocacy. Of course, there's legal advocacy, there's social advocacy, how you're engaging with neighbors, friends, and families, and spiritual advocacy. Prayer is a form of advocacy. I don't know, again, we might be able to share these resources via email, later with you, but the executive director of Churches for Middle East Peace, Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon, has written many books on advocacy, and so we encourage you to consult those resources. One of the most recent one is Beyond #Activism, and it looks, again, a bit more deeper into the different forms of advocacy. So across all of these realms of advocacy, there's a common theme. Each involves, to various degrees, building and cultivating relationships. And I think that's important for us to talk about because I often hear, I've been doing advocacy in DC for different groups. I've been at CMEP for now over 7 years, but have been in DC doing this type of work for over a decade. And I often hear from people that they just think that there's no way that they could do congressional, advocacy. There's no way that they could come to DC and meet with their congressional offices because it just seems too difficult of a challenge. But really, it's about relationships. It's about building relationships with people that are in those positions to represent you. And it's a conversation. And I think that helps if we frame it that way to kind of demystify it so that it isn't just this idea of, back and forth debate, and you have to be, an expert on every minutia of the law and policy. Of course, we'll talk a bit more later. You want to know what you're talking about, and you want to have facts and evidence that can back up what you're bringing. But really, as a constituent in the public square, in the advocacy space, you're bringing your stories, you're bringing your passions, you're bringing your experiences. You're saying, this is why X issue is important to me. This is why, even though it might seem that, Israel, Palestine, Gaza, so far away from where we are, right? Physically, the miles that separate us. But why is this an important issue still for me? So I think that's helpful to just frame it, that advocacy is really a form of relationship building and cultivating these relationships over time. So why do we advocate? I think, at this moment in time, as we get closer to the elections, with this current climate that feels, where we're further apart, where the divides are just so apparent, does your voice matter? You might feel powerless, that really, what am I going to do? I'm just one person. But we can't be complacent. I think it's really important, again, to show that This is how we hold our elected officials accountable. It's how we show that there is a collective voice that is concerned about these particular issues. And studies back up that advocacy is constituent citizen advocacy is really critical. So there was one study, this was done now about, I think, 10 or 15 years ago, but the Congressional Management Foundation had a study called The Perceptions of Citizen Advocacy on Capitol Hill. And it found that citizens really do have more power than they realize. So this was of congressional staff were polled on this. And the survey said constituents' visits to Washington, coming to DC, had a 97% influence on an undecided member, more than any other influence group or strategy. So also they said that calls to the offices, questions at town hall meetings, letters to the editors, these were all, and we'll again get into this a little bit more in the coming minutes, but these are all tools that were effective in helping to sway members that might be undecided on a particular issue. So there really is power in our voice. And if we concede that power because we think that it's useless, we're really losing a key component of the work that is before us. So sorry, I'm moving a little quickly just because I want to make sure that we have time to get into the current issue. So I could talk a lot more about this particular area, but I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking on how do we advocate. So it used to be that prior to the pandemic, the expectation was that if you wanted to have a conversation with your congressional member or office on a policy issue, you really had to come to Washington, D.C. That was the sort of expectation. There were opportunities if your member, if it was during a recess and they were back in their district or state, but generally, engagement on a policy level had to happen in Washington, D.C. The pandemic did shift that. Obviously, during the COVID time, when travel wasn't possible, just like we all had to pivot in our churches and our schools and other areas to using Zoom and other virtual platforms, Congress had to do the same thing. So it's become much more common now to have virtual Hill meetings with your congressional offices. Even now, we're shifting back, of course, or it's been shifted for a little bit now that in-person meetings are sort of back to being the norm in many ways, but offices are still open to having virtual meetings on policy issues. Just actually earlier in the week, I did one with a constituent in Pennsylvania who was not, able to come to DC, but wanted to talk to their congressional office on a particular issue related to Israel-Palestine. And so just to let you know, we welcome, Hassan and I are both based in DC. We love when constituents come and do grassroots advocacy here in DC, but you don't have to. And so if travel considerations have been an issue for you, we know that not everyone is able to travel for a host of reasons. It is possible to set up these virtual meetings. And again, if you're interested in doing that, please let us know, and we would be happy to help talk through what that looks like. But meeting with your congressional offices isn't the only way that you can advocate. I know that there are some people who just feel like that is not their strength, or they're nervous to do that. I think Hassan and I can also tell you stories of so many people that have come to us that have said, I can never do that. I'll never be able to. And then they do it the first time and they're hooked. And then they become leaders in their communities on congressional advocacy and organizing. So for some, once you get over that hump of doing it once, it's really actually, it becomes addictive. So you might surprise yourself. But for those of you that really don't feel like that's your area, you don't have to force it. There are other ways that you can use your voice with congressional offices that are not, sitting down in person or via Zoom and meeting on these policy issues. You can call your congressional office. Right now, Congress is out of session until after the election, but staffers are still working in DC, and so it's still possible to call and share your perspectives on any number of issues with your congressional offices. And so calling is something that is an option. And if you're interested in that, we can, again, also help think through different scripts, or we actually at CMAP have a script that if you visit our website, you can utilize in a click to call feature where you can call your congressional offices on issues related to a ceasefire. And I know that FCNL also has a variety of resources also on their website, and we encourage you to look at those too in terms of reaching out to your congressional members and their staff. Writing letters. I will say that in most cases, it's not recommended to send a physical letter, especially to Washington, D.C., just because there's a lot of security steps that need to happen before they can open up a letter. So especially if it's time sensitive, you don't want to send a letter. If it's around a particular vote that's upcoming, you would not want to send a physical letter to DC. But again, most congressional offices will have a way to contact them. And if you visit their website, you can kind of see what that looks like and use that as a tool. Whether you're calling, whether you're emailing, one thing that is clear in again some of the studies that have been done of congressional staff is that the individualized ones, where it's clear that this is coming directly from a constituent and not just a form response that they're forwarding on, that has the most impact. So I would encourage you, even in the call script that we provide, it's very basic, and we encourage you to insert your own, few sentences about why this issue is important for you. So yes, I know many of you likely have signed up for different advocacy alerts for a variety of organizations, and we encourage you to continue to send those. But any opportunity you have to customize it and to share why this is important for you as a constituent is critical. So would encourage you to find ways to do that. Other options are letters to the editors or op-eds. So some of you feel more comfortable writing than you do speaking. And so this is something, especially if a letter to the editor in your local newspaper mentions the congressional member by name, it's very likely that would come across that member's desk. There are staffers who, their main part of their job is to look through all mentions of the congressperson or senator in media, especially if it's local within the district or state, and flag that for the office. So, if you are able to get published in a local letter, for a letter to the editor, that's another way to advocate. I'm going to stop there now just because I want to make sure that we have some time for Hassan to talk us through opportunities that are relevant right at the moment on Capitol Hill. So I'll turn it over to Hassan.
Kyle, thank you so much. Really important overview of the power of congressional advocacy They certainly hear from Kyle and I quite a bit, but what they really need to be hearing from is constituents. And I think that's the most important thing we can be doing right now. At the top of what Kyle was saying, express the urgent need to end this war, bring hostages home, get humanitarian aid into Gaza, into Lebanon, and really de-escalate the entire Middle East. And we know Israel right now is preparing to do a retaliation strike on Iran. So there's lots we can do. I'm going to unpack a few things. And I do think that this period right now before the election and the lame duck is our moment to really create an inflection point in this war and hopefully wind it down. So I'm going to start off with UNRWA funding because I think that's super important. So I'm going to start with UNRWA and then talk about joint resolutions of disapproval to block these offensive weapon sales to Israel. So starting with UNRWA, Gaza isn't starving. It's being starved. There are right now over 2 million Palestinians facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with famine and disease spreading due to a lack of aid access. And amid this catastrophe, the Biden administration and Congress made a disastrous decision to halt all U.S. funding to UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, supporting Palestinian refugees in Gaza. And that is really making a bad situation a lot worse. And these U.S. actions were a knee-jerk response to Israeli allegations that 12 out of the 13,000 UNRWA staff working in Gaza, 30,000 across the region, were directly involved in the Hamas attacks on October 7. As the facts have come in, though, it's become clear that there really was an unjustified rush to judgment against UNRWA. And this organization has a long history. It was established by the United Nations General Assembly in 1949 to carry out direct relief programming for Palestinian refugees that were displaced in the Nakba. And the agency began its operations in 1950 and really has provided vital relief to Palestinian civilians who are in a real desperate need. They have been for a long time, but right now, with this massive humanitarian crisis that's going on in Gaza and Lebanon. So what happened? So Congress and the Biden administration, they cut off this funding. The administration paused the funding, and then Congress proceeded to put that into legislation, and they cut it off till March 2025. Thankfully, some really amazing members of Congress, including Reps Carson, Jayapal, and Schakowsky, have introduced very recently in September the UNRWA Funding Emergency Restoration Act of 2024. And the bill number on that is HR 9649. If you want to see if your member is on there, you can go to congress.gov. Again, that bill number is HR 9649. Now, massive amounts of support has come towards this bill. We're now about 70 co-sponsors for a new bill in Congress. Having that much support is not normal. So we have a lot of support. And key members like Rep. DeLauro have jumped on. She's the ranking Democrat on House Appropriations, so it's fantastic. We also have a really robust group of organizations that have endorsed it as well. Very diverse. Sometimes, things can get very pigeonholed where, you have certain types of organizations that support different initiatives. This one has broad support. We're talking all the way from USCPR, groups like Code Pink, groups like Americans for Peace Now and J Street, and the list goes on and on. So you advocating for this, you're really representing a mainstream position right now, and hopefully that's going to help you out. So I wanted to go over 4 key talking points that we would like folks to share with their members of Congress, in addition to sharing your own personal story about why you really resonate with this issue and support Palestinian refugees and ending this horrible humanitarian crisis. So when Kyle and I are in these congressional offices, we usually lean on these 4 points. One is that UNRWA is the backbone of all aid delivery in Gaza. And blocking this funding will only exacerbate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which is home to 2 million Palestinians experiencing displacement, hunger, disease, not to mention a polio epidemic and just unspeakable horrors that have been unfolding over the past year. So UNRWA is the backbone of all aid delivery. And we say, but there's more. It's not just blocking this U.S. funding doesn't just stop aid delivery in Gaza. It actually stops aid delivery across the entire region. That's including East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. And clearly, there is a massive humanitarian crisis going on as a result of the Israeli incursion into Lebanon, 1.2 million Palestinians displaced. And yes, UNRWA is also being the backbone of a lot of the aid operations in Lebanon as well. So it's not just about Gaza, it's also about Lebanon and this de-escalation across the region. And if UNRWA were to close its doors, we would see even more regional instability and violence. The other point we try to make, which is very important, is that in response to these Israeli allegations, UNRWA and the UN did what we would expect of a professional organization. UNRWA immediately fired the 12 employees, and the UN General Secretary Guterres ordered an inspector general investigation and commissioned an independent outside review of UNRWA's mechanisms and procedures. And UNRWA has taken concrete steps to implement all of the recommendations and had shown a real commitment to neutrality, a continued commitment to neutrality. So, one, we got the backbone of all aid delivery. Two, it supports humanitarian response across the region, and it's really important. And then UNRWA is also taking these important steps to pursue accountability, support oversight, and we should continue to support their work. Last point I always make is that after this prompt action by both UNRWA and the UN, and as additional facts have come to light, including the fact that Israel has not shared its evidence on all of these different employees with the UN or UNRWA, that 15 of the 16 countries that had originally suspended support have resumed their funding. And this includes key U.S. allies, including the UK, the European Union, Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Australia, and more. And it is critical that the United States join that group and restore UNRWA funding for the sake of so many millions of civilians that are struggling with unspeakable atrocities going on in Gaza and Lebanon right now. So we have to support UNRWA funding. There is a lot I could say. There's a lot of pushback. I have drafted an op-ed. It was published in The Hill. If folks want to look that up, that can give you a lot of these talking points. And we know that, ultimately the definitive path to address this crisis is a permanent ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, and unrestricted humanitarian access. But these really are just the first steps in what we know is going to be a long and challenging and prolonged rebuilding journey. And protecting UNRWA's essential role is really important to provide healthcare, education, and support Palestinians in Gaza and supporting their future. So Congress has the power to make this happen, and they need to co-sponsor and support passage of this important bill. One detail on the process is we are now in the CR cycle where there's a continuing resolution and the government is now funded till December. After that, there's going to be a real conversation in earnest about doing the FY25 appropriation cycle. And they're going to figure out, are we going to extend the ban on UNRWA funding, Or are we going to lift those restrictions and allow UNRWA funding after March 2025? So getting your member to co-sponsor this bill on the House side and get hopefully a Senate companion, or at least some letter efforts saying that members of Congress support UNRWA, will help the appropriations negotiations and help folks like Rep. DeLauro, who is really in the driver's seat on a lot of those negotiations, make sure that UNRWA is retained in the final bill through conference and that we can see a full restoration. Again, the United States, we are historically the largest supporter of UNRWA funding, and it's critical that we join that group of countries that restored that funding. So I thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about this really critical issue. And with that, I'm going to turn the page and talk about trying to end U.S. complicity in this, because it's not just enough to fund the humanitarian response. We also have to understand that what's going on in Gaza is not just some random event. This is a mass atrocity that's going on, and it's being funded with U.S. bombs and military support that our taxpayer dollars are contributing to. And it is absolutely, it's so long and overdue for Congress to hold a public vote and debate on finally ending U.S. complicity in Israeli human rights abuses against Palestinian civilians that have been living for decades under occupation, and now this horrific bombardment that's been going on. So these joint resolutions of disapproval really mark a historic moment and are, in fact, the first major effort in Congress to block weapon sales to Israel. And this is in U.S. history. We've never seen a major effort like this before. And we have a critical opportunity to make a huge difference and get senators to vote yes, and really to use all forms of U.S. leverage to bring, again, this comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, get the hostages home, and de-escalate the crisis across the region. So what's going on here? In August, the Biden administration approved a series of arms sales to Israel totaling more than $20 billion. And these JRDs, or Joint Resolutions of Disapproval, they are a mechanism under the Arms Export Control Act where any sitting senator can actually force a vote and debate to block the given sales. And so we are really grateful to Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Peter Welch from Vermont, Senator Jeff Merkley, and Senator Brian Schatz for their leadership in introducing several resolutions combined to block many of these sales, which have been used in airstrikes that have killed thousands and thousands of civilians, including aid workers and journalists and men, women, and children that really deserve to be breathing right now and should never have been attacked in any way. So these sales include specifically, we say offensive weapons. I don't personally love that distinction, but for some of our advocacy on the Hill, we're clear that we're not talking about Iron Dome and David Sling or any air defense technology. We're talking about stuff that's been used in Gaza and now Lebanon to indiscriminately bomb civilians. This includes stuff like the Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAMs, and 120 millimeter tank shells, which have repeatedly been used to attack densely populated areas. So the United States, we can't claim any moral high ground right now when we're sending billions of dollars of weapons to the government of Israel, which has shown little to no regard for civilian life and refuses to abide by the United States law and policy and international humanitarian law. So again, Congress needs to pass these resolutions and use all forms of leverage to try to get this permanent ceasefire. So just a quick thing on the process. We've heard that Senator Sanders is negotiating the timing of the vote right now. It's likely going to happen after the November election. So we got a nice runway to lobby our members of Congress, write those LTEs and op-eds, and get our community to get on board with this. When we are talking, when Kyle and I are in these congressional offices, we like to bring up 3 key points to back up the need for these JRDs, or joint resolutions of disapproval. One is documented human rights violations. Independent human rights observers and conflict monitors have thoroughly documented the Israeli military's use of these very weapons from the United States in attacks that have killed Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And President Biden himself has described these attacks as indiscriminate. Also, human rights groups have stressed that Israeli forces continue to block the delivery of humanitarian aid, as hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza are on the precipice of starvation and suffering from the deadly spread of diseases, including polio. So one, we say, this is well documented. These weapons are used to violate human rights and break U.S. law and policy. Contradictory to U.S. law and policy, speaking of which, there are specific provisions that in U.S. law that say, you can't give weapons to governments and units that are violating fundamental human rights and attacking civilians. So that, in the case that there are these violations, that there are specific rules in place to say we're not allowed to give, these arms sales to these countries. Based on this human rights and humanitarian assistance criteria, there's one specific provision we lean on a lot, which is 620I of the Foreign Assistance Act. And what that says is that if you are blocking U.S. humanitarian aid, like USAID, which USAID officials and lots of folks have said is happening, we're not sending you offensive weapons, full stop. And so we are, through this through this joint resolution of disapproval, we're trying to get them to enforce U.S. law. Last but definitely not least is that by selling these weapons, we're giving up important leverage that we need to be prioritizing a ceasefire in Gaza, in Lebanon, bring the hostages home, support regional de-escalation, flood the zone with humanitarian aid, and let's turn the page and find a way forward towards healing and prosperity for everybody in the region. We want to make sure that every kid, whether or not they're Palestinian or Israeli, can sleep safely at night. And these weapons are not helping. And passing these resolutions and voting for these resolutions will bring a clear message that that diplomacy, not more war and weapons, is the way we're going to get out of this mess. No weapon sales are going to solve this the Israel-Palestine conflict. And after a year of fighting, we see why. We've just seen devastation and new generations of trauma that are unfortunately probably going to lead to more cycles of violence. Diplomacy is the way forward, not more weapons of war. And so that's why we're asking everybody, all hands on deck, call your senators, write the LTEs, write the op-eds, and get your members to co-sponsor and vote in favor of JRDs to block these offensive weapons to Israel. The bill numbers are SRES 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116. I've just been saying, co-sponsor these JRDs to block offensive weapons to Israel, and you can do that too. Folks will know what they mean. The reason why there are so many is because there are different resolutions for each one of the different weapons categories. Again, we're talking about a $20 billion sale. That also includes F-15s, these fighter jets, tactical vehicles. For FCNL, we don't support any of it. Maybe your member will co-sponsor one and not co-sponsor the other. We just want to create some momentum. So do what you can. And with that, I am so grateful and honored to have this opportunity to speak with you all today. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Churches for Middle East Peace, for having me on to have this discussion.
Hassan, I actually have a question for you. You gave us a lot of bill numbers, resolutions. Where could we go to find more information on those things, or to know what's going on, so that we can stay abreast of the news and current with what's going on and know how to advocate better?
I think I missed the first part.
Okay. Sorry. You mentioned a lot of different bills and resolutions when you were talking. Is there a site, a place, a resource where we could go that kind of tracks those different things so that we know how to advocate more specifically, more effectively when we're calling our Congress people?
Yeah. So one, I have this. I'm going to share some links with you, Hannah. One is the Hill article I mentioned, which really lays out the bill. Has links to it and all the different talking points that I mentioned. So, or fcnl.org /UNRWA is the first one. So if folks want to take that, that's going to take you right to your member of Congress. So the op-ed is good for the background, and then fcnl.org /UNRWA. It's all can be found on FCNL's website. That's a great way to email your member of Congress directly. On the JRDs, we are putting out a legislative ask that's not up just yet. I just finalized it, but I'm going to share that link with you as well. The one that we've created to so you can message your members of Congress. I'll dig that up now and share it with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I am just so thankful for both of these gentlemen coming today because I learned a ton. It was actually really encouraging to me when Kyle said that advocating is just building relationships. And then giving me so many different options, whether I feel like I can speak or write, or if you're like me and don't feel like you can do either, then a phone call seems pretty unintimidating, especially if I have a script that I can go off of. But I'm just so thankful because I learned so much. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Hassan. And thank all of you for being with us. And I hope you've enjoyed this event. It's been very meaningful to me, and I know I've learned a lot. And can't wait to hear back from all of you. Thank you all so much.